So today I got this email, and at first it looks like someone's trying to give me like some really helpful advice. There's a CVE that's very severe in my copy of WordPress here on Capricorn.org. And it's addressed to our IT organization for Capricorn, aka Pandemonium, the actual company, the nonprofit that runs Capricorn. So far, I'm thinking, wow, this looks pretty legit. It's got their logo. There's not any serious typos here. And I'm like, but I've never seen anything like this come across from WordPress before. I've never had them email me. And so I happen to notice this. Now, in and of itself, this may or may not be legit. Too many times I've seen large companies create new domains to do mass mailings from because they just can't get IT to change an SPF record, or the combined who's responsible for this. We'll have a meeting to figure it out with all the stakeholders. Okay, we figured it out. Fill out this form in triplicate, and now we've got to wait for the next change window. And we didn't get the mop approved, and that window is scrubbed, so you'll have to wait till next month, and yada yada yada. And they're just like, F it, I'm just gonna go buy a domain, plug it right into MailChimp, and start firing out. I don't have time for this. The customers will be dead by the time we figure out how to update an SPF record. So in and of itself, I'm a little skeptical, but yeah, maybe. And then I noticed this. The URL shortener is bit.ly. So that's pretty common in mass mailings and stuff. Except I know that WordPress has wp.me. And so I'm going, why wouldn't they be using their own URL shortener? So I click it, and it goes to this. And at first glance, this looks pretty legitimate. It's by WordPress. All the hover-overs look legitimate. It's even got reviews that are current. And hey, there's good security updates, how wonderful. It even has a 1-star rating. I mean, come on. How is that not legitimate? There's instructions on how to install it. They've got a whole thing about, this is an official plugin, last released 2 days ago, WordPress version 5.8 or higher, tested yada yada. It's got a change log. It's got a fucking change log. It's got a list of contributors. How is this not legitimate? All the links here go to things on WordPress.com. How is this not legitimate, right? So, my alarm bells are still going off because this is web WordPress still. Which is also different from info WordPress. Which, at first I didn't even notice that. So I downloaded and expanded the zip file because I wanted to see what was in here. So you look in here, right? This is like a really standard CSS that includes some stuff like your WordPress is up to date, you patched successfully. We encourage you to share this patch with people you think might be affected by this vulnerability. Wow. So far, this is looking really legitimate. You go in here and it's like, oh, okay. The patch is called WordPress-security. Looks good. And then you look at this, and it even has comments. I mean, it's really legitimate looking. But then I started noticing the names of these functions are obfuscated. That's a second bad sign. And it's like including stuff from WP includes. And does a WP create user? Hold up here. This code right here creates new users and makes them administrators. What is this doing in a security patch? So I see it's also adding actions in the plugin. When the plugin is activated, it calls this chunk of code. Oops. Damn it. Apparently this doesn't. I'll pull it up in text edit. Oh, that's going straight into Xcode. Never mind. I'll pull it up in text edit. So when it's installed, it just does a get admin URL. Okay. Weird, but whatever. It adds a pre-user query, WPBD. This one gets the current username, checks it against this function, this function with 4 different arguments, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And if it doesn't match, it alters the search query for usernames. If this, it doesn't do anything. It just lets them through. With this, it alters the search query for usernames to make it so if the user login is not number 1, user login is not number 2, user login is not number 3, username is not number 4. And over here I notice this other function which gets the IP address of the person running it and any proxies. Then I see this other address. This one right here basically says, hey, if the plugin's active, if the username is the first user, return. If the plugin is not active, return. If the plugin is active, it creates an array with this argument, adds it to a table, and then anything it sees, it unsets from that list table if it matches this. So it removes itself from the list. Why is it hiding itself? Unless it's the username of the first name. So let's take a better look at this function. It's the BYX. Oops. I keep getting this. It's everywhere. 20 times it appears in this file. But what does this function do? So this creates a salt of 0, a CRC32 of 0 concatenated with the site URL. This is like from the WordPress config, this would be capricorn.org for me. This would make it 0 capricorn.org CRC32. And this right here creates a SHA-256 hash of this 0 and the site URL and pulls a random substring out of it. Replaces any equal signs with 0, base 64 encodes, and then replaces the equal signs with blanks. Huh. That's weird. So we're getting like a random username. 4 of them. The first one's real special. But then I struggle and I see this. And you'd think, look how they call it. They call it a scanning token, right? Oh, well, we'll get file get contents base 64 decode scanning token. Well, base 64 decode means this is a base 64 encoded URL. Or, well, file name or something, right? So we'll go over here. We'll go to this base 64 decoder. Decode. And that's guardcve.com/runscan. Where does that go? Well, I happen to have it pulled up right here. Wow. That is an incredible amount of gibberish, isn't it? Interesting. So I'm going to select this whole thing. Shove that into the base 64 decoder. And, well, damn. That's valid parsable PHP. And if we go back, we will see that it retrieves this URL and parks it in a directory specified by zbsnmf. Oops. Which just does a stir to lower WP BYXOAO. Which does that little magical username creation. So it creates a file called wp.username.php. Puts the file there and marks it as executable. Well, that's interesting. So now I can hit a special URL and it runs whatever this is. And what is this? Truly massive. What doesn't this code do? It's got its own implementation of XOR, ASCII to hex, hex to ASCII. And if we go around in here, we'll find all kinds of crazy stuff. Like these weird arrays. We find all kinds of stuff, checking which version of PHP it's running on, serving all sorts of weird URLs depending on what kind of headers it's being used. And there's stuff like execute files, create pipes, create a SOX proxy. So we go right here, and this is where the money shot comes in. I'm looking for strings that kind of stick out. This is real interesting here. It's a big old massive script, and it's got stuff like send as, save as, MySQL PDO-lib. This thing has stuff to hook into Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server. This thing can dump databases of various types. Anything this machine's configured to. It has special editor modes for practically every software language known to man that might run on a web server. Like, this is truly massive. And what is it? Well, I happened to find it. It's something called PAS fork. It's a web shell that evades WAFs and IDFs. Doesn't that just look exactly like what I've got in my hands over here in this other tab? Huh. Frickin' identical. So, what is PassFork? It's a web shell. It works via GET requests, automated switching to posts, obfuscation of query keys and values, uploaded files. They tell you this is an actual request to look at the Etsy password file. It doesn't contain that string anywhere. An IDS or a WAF would have no clue. This is the response. It too just looks like a bunch of garbage. But meanwhile, this is the user interface they're getting. I mean, it's like a file system browser. This is sophisticated as shit. It's got a SQL client, a PHP console, a terminal. I mean, truly impressive stuff. This is what they almost got me to put on my server. I mean, it's got a highlight, like, language sensitive text editor. For crying out loud. Just so you have syntax highlighting. I mean, dude. So much for a, like, security patch, right? These people are having you give direct access to the computer to some rando. So how would they know? Okay, so this is now backdoored. How would they know this username? Well, here in WPBD, or sorry, over here, this thing called BWP Pi. So it's going to list it as a plugin. It gets the site URL. It creates a random password through this algorithm, which basically takes this character set, shuffles it, and then grabs a 12-character randomized string out of it. That's now the password. It then generates 4 usernames. And then it does this file get contents again. Base 64 decode scanning token URL encode message. Now what it's doing is making the site URL, the username, the username, the username, the username, and the password, and the IP address of the poor sucker who logged in. And it's submitting it to this URL. Again, base 64 encoded. So we pop over to the handy dandy base 64 decoder. And what do we see? It's being uploaded to guardcve.com, WP-API site URL equals. So when you install this plugin, it creates 4 users with a random password, uploads those 4 usernames, the URL of your website, your personal IP, and the randomized password to this hostile website. When they log in, it will download and execute PassFork 1.4 on your web server, allowing them to do literally anything. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I immediately hopped on Mastodon and Twitter, where a lot of InfoSec is, and I put out a warning. You're going to want to look at this function, base64 decode this, and I got someone on the WordPress security team looking at this in minutes to make sure, see if there's anything they could do. I shared it with him just to show him what it is. And he's like, man, this is terrible. This even references a legitimate bug fix, a legitimate vulnerability, except WordPress doesn't have a proactive security team who would scan people's sites and send them fixes. Submits this to Microsoft's malware team and put the host URL to Google Safe Browsing. And I point out, yeah, I didn't fully investigate. I saw it was nasty, but I needed to go grocery shopping and wanted to get the word out fast before people got hurt. And, I pointed out, hey, I found Passfork and all that because I was back from grocery shopping. And, yeah, I did submit it to Microsoft. I'm waiting for them to actually look at it. I mean, their anti-malware currently says, yeah, nothing's there. Dude, I am promising you, this is one of the most hostile pieces of code you'll ever put in WordPress. And Google's security team is also looking at it. I expect to hear back soon. Hopefully those URLs will get disabled. I also reached out to Cloudflare, who hosts their websites. I'm kind of hoping that they'll get their URLs shut off. But that's kind of the anatomy of a breach. Somebody tries to target you. There's my reports to Cloudflare. Right after I went to Meyer. Microsoft. They have my submission. Yeah, so that's how it goes, man. Watch yourself out there. It is crazy.